There's a lot of frequently repeated self-help advice going around, like wake up at 5 a.m. or time block for efficiency or meditate every morning. And whilst there's definitely value in a lot of these pieces of information, and they've helped thousands if not millions of people, I actually want to share 8 unconventional pieces of advice that have helped me when it comes to productivity and creativity, but I just rarely hear mentioned. Now, some of these things I've picked up through reading or watching other creators, and other things is just through going through life and kind of picking up on these lessons and realizing, wait, okay, so nobody really speaks about that, but clearly there's evidence that this helps me be more productive or be more creative, generate new ideas, and actually make good on them, make an impact with them. So let's just get into it. Now, the first piece of advice is that you don't actually need to allocate more time to your work, but you need to allocate less. And this is predicated on Parkinson's law, the idea that your work will expand to fill the time allotted for its completion. That means even if a task could have been done in 1 hour, like editing or writing or whatever it is, but you've allocated 5 hours to it, you will find a way to use all of those 5 hours, right? The work is expanding to fill the time that you have allocated for it. And this isn't a very efficient way to move through life, right? It's not an efficient way to use your time, which is precious, and it is non-renewable. You will find things that you can keep adding forever and ever, and you will eventually reach the point of diminishing returns. While if you have a very small amount of time or a very tight deadline, you will leverage or you will lean on high impact tasks that will give you the biggest outcome for your input. And this is a really important thing when you're thinking about efficiency and doing things that will move the needle forward as opposed to just floating around. Now, of course, there's a point where it's like, if you leave it 5 minutes, say, before the deadline is due, you're probably not going to produce a great piece of work. But also dragging it out over, say, 4 months when you could have got it done in 1 month and spent the other 3 months doing other high impact tasks. Now, 2 books that feed into this quite nicely is The 4-Hour Work Week and Deep Work. So The 4-Hour Work Week is by Tim Ferriss, and it's effectively about condensing your work week, as it would suggest, into the minimal amount of time by focusing on tasks that you can do, outsourcing the rest, using efficiency and automation in other ways. Effectively, if you only have 4 hours to work on your business, you again are going to pick the most high impact things to work on, and think about the things carefully that only you can do, right? And that will leverage your skills, your talents the most. Deep work is about going intensely into work for that period of time, right? Blocking out everything else, all distractions, everything else, because if you've got 5 hours, you might also have a podcast on in the back. If you've got to get it done in 1 hour, you're in a zone of focus now, right? You are in deep work because you know that I only have X amount of time, or I've allocated myself X amount of time to get this thing done. So the second piece of unconventional advice is that you should actually spend more time being bored. Now, this may sound kind of weird on the surface, but allow me to kind of explain this. Neuroscientists have been looking into the impact of basically boredom, or really allowing your brain the space to kind of not be so focused on one task like reading or your phone, and instead be doing something more menial, more of a background task, and the connections and the ideas and the problem solving that happens during those periods. We've entered a time where we are afraid to be bored, right? Think about the last time you stood in a line, right? And the first thing you probably did was take out your phone because, we can't possibly for a moment have to look around or maybe, interact with people, or worse yet, be with our own thoughts. And so we've lost this kind of time with ourselves that doesn't involve hyper focus, right? Because if I'm scrolling, that's still quite an intense task. Even though we may think of it as a background task, I'm watching it, I'm listening to the person, I am looking at their body language. If there are effects flying on the screen, I am engaging with all of that, which leaves very little time and room for my brain to ruminate on ideas or make connections with things that I have been, working on or reading, or I don't even know, just interacting with at different points. This is the reason why it's thought that people have great ideas when they're in the shower or when they're on a quiet walk. In these moments, these kind of pockets, you are again doing something that is a relatively background task, like just showering, which doesn't require you to laser focus, or walking. So there's some sort of movement going on, there's some sort of activity, but there's still so much space for your thoughts and ideas. And I can definitely attest to this. There have been a number of points in my life where just by walking, just by doing a task like that, I have had so many ideas come to me on walks in the morning. Like, there's a number of creators who've also spoken about the power of walking. But it could be anything, but it has to just be a task that doesn't require intense focus to give yourself that room to think things over. And I think ultimately a lot of our best ideas come not when we sit down and say, I'm going to have a brilliant idea today, but instead when we're going about our daily business and we give ourselves room for that to happen. And the third piece of advice is that feelings of inferiority aren't necessarily a bad thing. Now, this actually comes from the book The Courage to be Disliked, and the author talks about the fact that inferiority is not inherently bad, right? So long as the inferiority that you are feeling is by comparing yourself to an ideal version of yourself and not someone else. What does this really mean? If I know that I could be in a better body, I could be in better health and better shape and nourishing my body with exercise and food and nutrition in a better way, then that means logically I'm in an inferior place right now, right? This version of me is inferior to the superior one that could be living better, healthier, getting more exercise, more nutrients into my body. And that gap between where I want to be and where I am is causing these feelings of inferiority. But if I act on them in order to get to point B from point A, then is that necessarily a bad thing? Now, what is at issue is if I see someone else's body or someone else's life and I feel inferior because I am not them, well, now we have an issue. Because now it's not about me being the best version of myself, the highest version of myself, the more superior version of me. It's about me trying to be someone else, which is completely different. But that link there is often what drives a lot of successful people. The fact that they know they could be better. Now, they know they could be doing more. And with most things, there's a line when you cross it, it becomes unhealthy and it becomes kind of chaotic and problematic. But just enough of it is what keeps people on their toes, right? It's what keeps people striving for more and wanting to do more because they know there's a version of themselves that could be more impactful, that could be helping people more, or could be learning more, or could be making a change in whatever their industry is, right? There is the inferior and the superior. And I know these words are quite emotive, and I am drawing from the language in the book, but if you just really grasp the core of what it's saying, then logically we know that all of us who are striving to be better must accept then that we are in an inferior state if we know that there's a better state that we can be in. That doesn't mean that we don't have value, inherent value. That does not mean that we don't deserve to be loved and respected, but that we can be doing more, that there's a higher version of ourselves, and that version of ourselves is often more productive, more creative, more intuitive, all of these things. The fourth piece of unconventional advice actually is something that I kind of stumbled across when just really actually through my skincare routine, which sounds weird, but it's the idea that addition is not synonymous with improvement. And I briefly spoke about this in one of my other videos a couple of years ago, but it's this idea that just because you add does not mean the situation has been improved, whether it be your productivity, your creativity, or just life in general, right? Just adding more things doesn't mean better. Now, a prime example of this is just doing more work doesn't mean that you're going to be getting better outcomes if it's not the right sort of work, right? You could be doing 50 tasks and that feels like a lot and that's great. Or you could be doing 3 very high impact tasks, things that are rooted in fundamentals of business or of creativity or of any of these things. But that will drive you to your outcome a lot faster, a lot more efficiently, and perhaps with less pain than just more work, more tasks, boom. It's a similar sense with friends, right? Just because you add more people around you doesn't mean you feel less lonely, doesn't mean you have more friends. You've just added people around you, which is not synonymous with improving relationships or improving how you feel around the people that are around you. So the long and short of it is that really often simplifying things can be the best approach in being more productive and more creative, right? Just going back to the fundamentals and only adding when you need to, only adding layers of complexity when it is absolutely necessary. So fifth on this list is actually that the obstacle is the way. And this is also the book that it comes from by Ryan Holiday, who's kind of breaking down some of the lessons from the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who is a large figure in the philosophy and in Stoicism. But the idea of this is that we often think about the obstacle as a blocker, right? Whatever that is in our journey. Instead of seeing that actually that obstacle may be the way. It may be leading us onto a path that is more aligned with what we need to do, what we want to achieve, and how we're actually going to impact ourselves, our communities, and the wider world. And an example that I used when I was breaking down this book was actually in fitness and in health. I am prone to weight gain, and so I often find that, or I used to think that, if only I wasn't someone who just put on weight so fast, right? Then everything would be better. I would just live an easier life. But the fact that I did put on weight relatively quickly meant that I started to engage in exercise and nutrition more. Right? Those are things that I had to focus on in order to balance, or achieve the aesthetic and the physique that I wanted, as well as feel good about myself and not lethargic and so forth. But what that meant is that set me on the course of a completely new life, where fitness and lifting became cornerstones of my life and of what I even spoke about on social media and about products that I had kind of created around it. That obstacle of being prone to weight gain quite literally became the way, right? And it led to so many improvements in my life in terms of, like I said, my health, my aesthetics, but also how productive I was. And we can think of so many examples of where the obstacle, the thing that we thought was a huge problem, actually led us down a far more fruitful path. And this idea about the obstacles and the way we view them is super important, I think, with productivity and creativity. Because think about how many times you may have made a mistake or not quite captured what you wanted in terms of your creative pursuit. And yet something else came about it because of it. Right? Something else came from that obstacle that was actually far more beautiful, far more unique, or far more interesting than whatever else you planned on doing. And so I really love this idea, and there's an actual quote that I want to kind of read out. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This is that piece of advice, and do with it what you wish. Number 6 on this list comes from Ali Abdaal's book, which is about feel-good productivity. And this is the idea that productivity shouldn't be painful. Definitely not all the time. And one particular passage or one particular topic in this book that I liked was effectively around the idea of self-flagellation when things don't go right, when you're not as productive as you'd like to have been, or you didn't get the grades or the outcome that you wanted. And it's the idea that actually self-forgiveness as part of being productive and as part of your journey is actually huge in moving forward, right? Sometimes we feel like we have to be in pain or like grinding, or this has to feel horrible in order for it to be productive. But actually allowing ourselves to kind of be accepting of when things go wrong, right? Instead of punishing ourselves, forgiving ourselves that, things could have been better, but they didn't, actually allows us to move through our productive seasons with a lot more ease. And there's actually a study or in this particular book where they were looking at students who forgave themselves when things didn't go right and those who didn't. And those who forgave themselves performed much better than those who did. Now, there's a lot of things in this book about making productivity not just less painful, but actually enjoyable. So if you're interested more in that, then I would definitely suggest taking a look at that book or even just watching the review that I kind of done of the book. Unconventional advice number 7 is all about your ability to change your mind. Now, this stems from the idea that often we're told that the sign of a good person or a smart individual is they stand on their opinions. They stand on what it is they say, and they back it till the end of days. And whilst I understand where this is coming from, because nobody wants somebody who's wishy-washy, it's actually not a very scientific approach to life, or not really an open approach to life at all. Because what I found is that your ability to evolve and your ability to change your mind or be open to changing your opinions when you are faced with new evidence leads to a more productive life, a more creative life, a more freer life, a more enjoyable life in terms of interacting with others. So there are so many benefits of this piece of unconventional advice, I think, which is that you are effectively allowed to change your mind. You are. At any given point, if you believe the evidence in front of you is strong enough, so much so that, I think I need to change my hypothesis. I think my original statement is wrong, or at least needs some work, and I'm willing to change it, or I'm willing to move. That piece of advice can change so many things in your life. And it's really how we're supposed to approach science in general, and like this kind of optimal view of it is, we don't just pick something and then look for evidence to support it, which is very hard as a human being because we're always looking for things to support our ideas that we already have. But instead, we keep an open mind, collect all the evidence that we can, as thoroughly as we can about a particular subject within reason, and then we come to an informed decision. And that's okay, that's allowed to evolve, that's allowed to move. But like even about productivity, thinking about it in one way versus another way, or creativity. And as somebody who's been sharing their ideas online since they were in their early 20s, I can tell you a lot of my ideas have changed, and they've been changing in public, which is a whole experience in itself, but it's something that I've got comfortable with over time, right? And it's taken time, but once you do, you're like, I'm free. I am free as a human being to change my mind about things, to move directions. Whoa, this way of thinking about productivity actually hasn't really been working for me. I know that I said that, waking up at 5 a.m. was ideal, but I actually find that waking up when my body allows, which is more around 7, which is more around 9, works a lot better for me. Even though everyone else is saying one thing, and even though I once said one thing, this is what I found with this new evidence. And the final piece of unconventional advice that I want to speak about is actually that knowledge is not power, it is potential. Now, this particular quote comes from another Ali who actually made a video called Stop drinking and start pouring. Brilliant video, and I would really suggest that you watch that after you finish here, and I'll leave it linked as well. But this is the idea that yes, we can consume knowledge. We can consume information from a number of sources, and that is important. It is important, to have a number of diverse and high quality sources of information and knowledge. But what's it doing once you're collecting it? You're storing it within you. You haven't applied it in any particular way yet to make an impact for yourself, for your work, your creativity. All you are doing is storing this information. You haven't made any new connections. It's just sitting there. And whilst I'm not saying that you have to act on every single piece of information or knowledge that you acquire, it is important that you lean towards action, that you take that knowledge that is really like potential energy and make good on it, that you do something with it, that you take action. Right? This is one of the most fundamental things I think in being more productive and being more creative, is the work that you do with the knowledge that you have, the connections you make with the knowledge that you have. Right? That's really how we make new novel ideas, right? Like we make new breakthroughs. It's like we use all this information and knowledge that we have, but we actually act on it. We take steps towards moving in a new and interesting direction. So that's it. Let me know, do you disagree with any of these? Do you agree with any of them? Have you heard some of them before? I'm sure there are definitely some that you've heard, but what about ones that are new to you? Or ones that make you feel a little bit like, I don't know if I like that. Because even the inferiority one, when I first read it, I said, I don't like it. I realized I was having a very visceral reaction to the words inferior and superior, but the more that I kind of read and broke it down, I was like, I guess on a very, logical level, this makes sense. I'm not working to be a lesser version of myself. I'm clearly working to be a higher version. Anyway, without going back into all of that, I will see you in the next video.